failure, pulmonary, liver failure, everything shut down, lost arms and legs use, and now things are slowly coming back, getting better, and so I can't complain. Um, but I suppose the main thing about that might be a matter here is that um, I might start to sound a little bit strained in voice after a while because I don't talk this much anymore, and it's harder. So I ask your pardon for that in advance. Number two, how can we get people like you reinstated to retrain our leadership, current administration, so they understand the ideology we are up against? Well, I have to confess that I kind of thought when Trump was elected, or half expected, or hoped, that I would be reinstated as a trainer for FBI and military groups, for which about 5 years I would introduce those groups to the jihadi mindset and take them through the Quran and the life of Muhammad and show them what the belief system was of the jihadis. After all, it's one of the oldest adages of warfare going back to Sun Tzu. You can't defeat an enemy that you don't understand. And the Obama administration, people don't believe this when I tell them, but it's absolutely true, made it a matter of policy in 2010 that there would be no mention of Islam and jihad in counterterror training, thereby making it virtually impossible for agents, unless they did it on their own, unless they studied on their own, to understand the people that we're up against. And this was an appalling misuse of power, an appalling mistake for the feds. And it's not been fully corrected. Trump has reintroduced some counterterror material that talks about so-called Islamist extremism, but there's a lot of resistance in the FBI in particular, as well as in the military. There are a lot of people who think that it's a terrible thing to talk about Islam in connection with terrorism, and that it will only hurt the fight against terrorism. One of the foremost exponents of this was H.R. McMaster, who was the president's national security advisor for a while. And there are a great many people who believe the same things as H.R. McMaster, who are still in the State Department, still in the military, still in the FBI. And so there's a great many obstacles to speaking about these things in any realistic or accurate manner. And there's also a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about this point. I remember a few years back, I was on one of those Hannity town halls, you know, when he has about, I think it's 16 people and everybody's trying to get a word in. And I mentioned this. I said that this is a terrible scandal that the Obama administration has, which was then in power, disallowed any mention of Islam and jihad in connection with terrorism. And this woman who was also on the panel, unfortunately, I don't remember her name, actually said, no, that's not true. I was just at a meeting where we were discussing violent extremism. Well, violent extremism is the euphemism that the Obama administration employed in order to avoid speaking about Islam in connection with terrorism. And the Countering Violent Extremism CVE program actually was a studious attempt to make sure that terrorism was represented as anything but having anything to do with Islam. And so she kept insisting that it wasn't true while being testimony to the fact that it was true at precisely the same time. So in short, the answer is that people like me are still pretty much on the outs in Washington. I don't know of any others who speak realistically about this threat who are in the administration. But nonetheless, it must always be said when we're speaking about these things that a Hillary Clinton administration would have been 1,000 times worse. There are people who have been in the administration, like Fred Fleitz, who used to be the assistant to John Bolton, the national security advisor, who know about this issue and are willing to speak about it honestly. And they aren't there now, but they still are well tied in. And so that's a reason for some optimism. Number three, What is the strangest thing that has happened? What is the strangest thing that has happened since you started jihadwatch.org? What caused you to start jihadwatch.org? I'll answer the second one of those first. The reason why I started jihadwatch.org, which was way back in October 2003, was because I wanted to read it. I wanted to find a site that would speak about jihad activity and give me news about jihad activity every day, instead of having to go around and collect all these different articles from different places and try to understand what they were saying through all the obfuscations and distortions and denials that the establishment media employs. This didn't exist. And so ultimately I decided to take the advice of J.D. Salinger, who you may have heard of, the novelist who wrote The Catcher in the Rye and 3 better books than The Catcher in the Rye that are lesser known. And he said once that he wrote books that he wanted to read, but that hadn't been written. And I've actually done that with some of the books I've written, as well as with Jihad Watch. The idea of it was to fill that gap, which at least I felt, in what was available in terms of the news about jihad activity, along with explanatory material that would elucidate what it's really all about behind all the media obfuscation. For example, I think the most notorious example of that is that in the headlines at Jihad Watch, I always say Muslims did this or that. Muslims kill 20 people in Nigeria or whatever. Or this morning, a Muslim stabs a British soldier in the head and in his hand, and or maybe it was a police officer. I don't have it in front of me right now, but in any case, the point is that no other news source anywhere speaks about Muslims doing this. You see that it says an Asian man or a man from Luton or a migrant from Pakistan or something like that. They'll say any number of other things, but they won't identify the perpetrator as a Muslim. And the reason for that is because the establishment media wants to remove the idea, wants to obfuscate or cover up the idea that Islam has anything to do with terrorism or that Muslims commit terror attacks. But the fact is that, well, this guy today, who is a Pakistani immigrant from who lives in Luton in East London, he actually did attack I think it was a police officer, but he carried out his attack in any case because he's a Muslim, not because he's from Luton, not because he's from Pakistan. And so I'm the only one, as far as I know, who's unafraid of speaking about these things honestly and saying, well, no, he did this because of Islamic texts and teachings that mandate that a Muslim should have hatred for non-Muslim authorities and contempt for their authority. And so that's why he did this. That's why he stabbed this man. And so it doesn't any use to say he's an Asian or a man from Luton. It's completely irrelevant, really. It's about as important, as my colleague Pamela Geller says, as the color of his socks. And so I get straight to the point at Jihad Watch. What's the strangest thing that has happened since I started it? So many strange things have happened. We could spend the rest of the hour on that alone. I suppose the main thing is that people think it's something terrible. Like just the other day, the Irish Independent newspaper in Dublin, I believe, it attacked a young man there for attending the Young Americas Foundation conference in Washington. And it attacked him for attending the YAF conference because I've spoken for YAF. Now, I wasn't even at this conference in Washington recently, but that didn't matter to the Irish Independent. The fact that I have addressed YAF in the past was enough for them. And so they were going after this man. And they said, by way of explanation in their article, that I am the author of a website called Jihad Watch, or the publisher of it, as if that were bad enough in itself. And I thought, this is just astonishing to me, that the establishment media is so far gone nowadays that just tracking jihad activity is enough to get you on their list as being a terrible person, a hate monger, and so on. And that shows the power of the propaganda that has been pushed at us for so many years now by the left and by Islamic groups who claim that it's hate to fight against jihad terror and Islamic oppression of women and gays and so many others. they've really been very successful in this and have made many, many people think that this is indeed the case, that it's somehow hate to resist jihad terror. I remember way back in 2002 or 3 when I first heard this, I thought it was absurd. I was on an MSNBC show with Ibrahim Hooper of the Council on American Islamic Relations and Keith Olbermann, the notorious leftist announcer. And Olbermann asked me what my problem was with Islam in the first place. And I said, well, take this, for example, that several independent surveys, that is, surveys that were conducted independently of one another, separately arrived at the same conclusion that 80% of American mosques were under the control of extremists, or that is, Islamic jihadis. And I said, this is a matter of grave concern, and these mosques need to be investigated. We need to be honest about this. And then Olbermann turned to Hooper and asked him what he thought about this. And he said, well, Spencer's just a hate monger. And I thought, this is just ridiculous. I didn't participate in these studies. I'm not the author of these studies. And these studies are out there. They're, as a matter of fact, the only studies of Islamic jihad sentiments in American mosques. And they all say the same thing, that 4 out of 5 American mosques are involved in preaching the same ideology that Al-Qaeda and ISIS hold. And that was it. That was enough. I was a hate monger, and that was it as far as Olbermann was concerned and as far as Hooper was concerned. And I thought, this is astonishing, and Americans aren't going to go for this. This is just too ridiculous for words, that fighting against the ideology that took down the Twin Towers and killed 3,000 people on 9/11 is being a hate monger. It's beyond absurd, but it's been very successful, and it's taken deep root. So that is indeed the strangest thing that has happened since I started Jihad Watch. Number 4, how can we find ex-Muslim allies to partner with? In the first place, you don't need them. We don't need to play the identity politics games that the left plays. And there are all too many conservatives who think, and foes of jihad terror in general, who think, oh, well, we can't really say these things ourselves because we are non-Muslims, or because we're largely white, or because we're Americans. We have to get some Muslim to say it, some moderate Muslim spokesman, or if failing that, then some ex-Muslim. And that will give our efforts credibility, and it will give the impression that we're not racist or bigoted, which is what the left always says about us. In the first place, we're not racist or bigoted because it's not racist or bigoted to oppose mass murder and oppression of women and others. And so we need to just stand unapologetically on that. We don't have to have some front man who's a Muslim or an ex-Muslim to give our efforts validity. All that being said, at the same time, if you have to have one, there are some very courageous and outspoken ex-Muslims out there. Ibn Warraq, Noni Darwish are two who immediately come to mind. Also, Hazem Faraj, I think his name is, and Usama Dakduk, and several others who have gained some recognition for their honesty in speaking about these issues. I don't recommend any of the moderate Muslim spokesmen. I think that if you're going to be honest about the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of Islamic law, then you're going to see that Islam is not a religion of peace. And somebody like Zuhdi Jasser, who goes around saying that if you rightly understand Islam, it's really a peaceful religion, that's just not honest. He's either not being honest or he's not very bright. I don't know which one it is, but the fact is that what he's saying is false, and I don't see any good in telling falsehoods. Number 5, is there a way to easily detect who is genuinely friendly and who is a hidden radical practicing Taqiyya? Well, that's a good example. I'm not saying that Zuhdi is a hidden radical. He might just be somebody who is well, I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. I'll tell you another story if you don't mind. Many years ago, David Horowitz and I were doing an initiative to get Muslims to repudiate the genocidal hadith. A hadith is a report about Muhammad's words and deeds, and the genocidal hadith is a famous story in which Muhammad says, at the end times, in the last days, Muslims will kill Jews, and the Jews will hide behind trees, and the trees will cry out, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." And we figured, well, this, which is calling on Muslims to kill Jews in order to bring about the the last days, the consummation of all things, this is something that if Muslims are moderate, they ought to readily repudiate. So he asked all the Muslim groups and Muslim spokesmen in the United States to repudiate this hadith, and none of them would. And I was talking on the phone to Zuhdi Jasser, and I asked him if he would do it, and he said, well, I don't believe Muhammad really said that, and so I won't. And I said, well, that's not really the point. A lot of Muslims believe Muhammad said that. Hamas quotes this all the time. A lot of other Muslim spokesmen quote this all the time. And so can you repudiate it on that basis? And he said, yes, as long as you're not involved with it in any public manner. And I said, why? What's the matter with me? And he said, well, you wrote a biography of Muhammad in which you said that Muhammad was a warlord who killed people, who ordered the killings of others, who consummated his marriage with a 9-year-old girl, and so on. And I said, well, the earliest Islamic sources say that. I used Ibn Kathir and Ibn Sa'd and most of all Ibn Ishaq to write this book. Bukhari and Muslim, the Hadith collections and the other Hadith collections that are considered authentic by Muslims. So what should I have used if those aren't the sources, which are the earliest Islamic sources about what Muhammad was like, what Muhammad said and did? Not Ibn Kathir, but the others, Ibn Ishaq and the others. What's wrong? What sources should I have used? And he said, well, those are the sources, but I just believe that Muhammad was a wonderful man and you didn't portray him as such. And so I think, well, he's got his own, you remember that old song from the 80s, Your Own Private Idaho? He's got his own private Islam. Doesn't have anything to do with the real thing. And that's very nice, but nobody should really be thinking him as some influential Muslim spokesman. There's a reason why he doesn't have any significant following among Muslims. So in short, the answer is, how can we find ex-Muslim allies to partner with? I'm sorry, is there a way to easily detect who is genuinely friendly and who's a hidden radical practicing Taqiyya? One easy way, if you know some of the main aspects of Islamic doctrine, is to see if the guy's being honest. And if he's not being honest, well, then you know right away. Also, another good trigger is Israel. Ask him what he thinks about Israel. And a lot of Taqiyya artists will drop their masks there. Number 6, did the trial court repost Ilhan Omar's arrest records after you posted the blog, or was the post scrubbed for another reason? Did you take it down? Yeah, I took, just for background in case anybody is not familiar, a couple weeks ago I posted at Jihad Watch that Ilhan Omar's arrest records had been scrubbed by the, whatever that name of that is, the source in Minnesota. I'm sorry, the name escapes me right now, but it's an online source for arrest records, and you can put in the names of people who've been arrested in Minnesota and get their arrest records. And I had noticed that Ilhan Omar had a very extensive record of mostly traffic arrests, which I thought, well, that's not a big deal, a lot of traffic tickets, but 24 of them, you know, I've gotten about 2, I think, in the last 17, 20 years. 24 traffic arrests in the last 10 or 15 years. It seems like that manifests a certain contempt for the law. And so I decided to come back to that and write about it. But on the day I was able to write about it, the arrest records were gone. However, within like an hour of my posting about them, they were put back. And this was a Sunday morning, I believe, maybe a Saturday morning. So I just decided to take the post down because I thought maybe the fact that the arrest records were taken down, I don't think the Minnesota officials are watching Jihad Watch that closely to have seen my post in about an hour that it was up. They probably were just conducting routine maintenance on the site, which sometimes makes some sites go down. And the records were back. They're there now, so there doesn't seem to, I think there's no need to assume that there was any chicanery on their part about that. The arrest records are right there for you to find, should you look at them. If you can't find the name of the site, search for traffic and Minnesota and Ilhan Omar on Jihad Watch, and you get the exact name of that site. Number 7, do you think Ilhan will ever be investigated for her crimes? No, I don't think so. I think that she will she will get off scot-free, and she will be overwhelmingly reelected in 2020. She's just too valuable to the left as in their relentless game of identity politics as a hijab-wearing Muslim who is outspoken against American foreign policy, outspoken against Donald Trump, and so on. It's essentially a free pass to do whatever she wants. You remember Trump got in a lot of trouble a few years back for joking that his supporters were so fanatical that he could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York City and he wouldn't lose any supporters. Now, Trump was joking, but I'm sure that Ilhan Omar could go to downtown Minneapolis and shoot somebody and nothing would happen. Nancy Pelosi and the Star Tribune and everybody would cover for her. Is she guilty? Do you think, if she is guilty, sorry, do you think she will face the same punishment the rest of us would? Absolutely not, for the reasons I just described. If not, then why not? I think I answered that. She's a valuable asset in the identity politics game. And so she can do whatever she wants. She could break into your house tonight and steal your silverware. And it would be your fault because you're an Islamophobe. And next, how do we better educate people about dimitude? Well, that's just a matter of telling the truth in whatever platform you have. Give the information about what dimitude was and is in Islamic law and how there is no major Muslim organization that has ever repudiated it. It's still part of Islamic law. The thing is that there are concerted efforts to shut us up now, to close us off from all the platforms with any significant number. That's the thing that has to be tackled before anything else in this regard. 8, is Europe too far gone to be saved? Is the US? I'll tell you, I was born in South Carolina, which a lot of people are surprised about because I know I don't seem like a South Carolina boy, but nonetheless. And the South Carolina state motto is Dum Spiro Spero. While I breathe, I hope. And so I think that's very wise. There's no reason to think that any place is too far gone. There are not Sharia states in Europe yet, with the arguable exception of Kosovo. And so there's still a shot for Europe that maybe this whole thing could be headed off, in the US as well. But that's not to just be Pollyannish about this. There's no doubt that the situation is very dire in Europe. It's fairly dire here too because of the stigma that we operate under, because of the fact that I am a hate group leader according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Everybody else without exception who does this work is similarly stigmatized, demonized, and marginalized. And so it's not easy, but the fact is that we have the truth on our side. And I have confidence that the truth will ultimately win out. Maybe decades. The Soviet Union lasted for 70 years. It may be longer than that. But the truth will out, and we have a chance to beat this. Number 9, we have a child care center being opened up near us. It is named after a Sharia law manual, and we are deeply concerned about what will be being taught to the children. We are deeply concerned when we see little 6-year-old girls covering up so they are not looked at in a sexual way. Do you have any ideas on how we can get more people to understand what this means when we see little girls wearing hijab? Is there any way without interfering with freedoms to shut this down? Of course, we do not want children being abused by anyone. Well, I think you have the answer to your own question within the question, because you say, when we see little 6-year-old girls covering up so they're not looked at in a sexual way? I would say that the vast majority of Americans, well over 99% of Americans, have no idea that that's what the hijab is all about. And so that's what we need to proclaim here again in whatever platform that we have. And wherever we can get a soapbox, we need to be vocal and insistent about the fact that the hijab, the niqab, the burqa, the chador, all of them, all of the coverings for women are all about taking away the temptation from men. It's not a man's obligation in Islamic law to control himself. It is a woman's obligation to make sure that he's not tempted. And if she gets raped or sexually assaulted, it's her fault, because she did not go to enough effort to make sure that men are not tempted. The vast majority of Americans have no idea of this and how concomitantly the 6-year-old girls are being sexualized by being made to wear this. Because otherwise, if they were not considered to be a sexual object, they wouldn't have to wear it. And even younger girls than that. And so that's what I think is the key to getting Americans to be concerned about this and heading off the abuse that this could be heralding by trying to publicize as much as is humanly possible the underlying principles behind the hijab and how it is a deeply dehumanizing garment for Muslim women and girls. Number 10, do you think hate crime laws will be used as blasphemy laws? Oh, absolutely. That's what they are. There's no doubt about that. For example, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has compelled the UN several times to call upon member states to criminalize so-called incitement to religious hatred. But incitement to religious hatred has been around for centuries in the West and has never been criminalized. And a crucifix in a jar of urine was celebrated with a National Endowment for the Arts grant. And the establishment media scolded people who thought that it was disgusting and blasphemous against Christianity as being against the freedom of speech. But when it came to cartoons of Muhammad, suddenly the establishment media lost all its concern for the freedom of speech and started speaking about how we had to respect Islam and Muslims and not engage in hate speech. So it's very clear that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, by its very name, and the leftists in the Western intelligentsia and in the United States in particular are only concerned about offending Islam. That is, they're only concerned about enforcing Islamic blasphemy laws. They couldn't care less when there's blasphemy against Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism. It's all about Islamic blasphemy laws. How can we safeguard ourselves against Muslims using social media platforms to create fake posts that would implicate us in a blasphemy case? Well, if the post is fake, then you have to be able to document that. And so you have to document your own sites and be very careful to take screenshots of everything that you post and timestamps and everything that can be manipulated, and keep an archive of all these things. Of course, you're going to get prosecuted, you're going to get blamed, you're going to get falsely accused anyway, because the people we're opposing have a great deal of power, a great deal more power than we have. And we can only hope that the president's recent statements about an executive order that compels the social media giants to be more fair in their application of their hate speech so-called requirements, that might save this situation. But right now, that situation is very dire. Number 11, CARE is Hamas. How can we get them declared a terrorist organization and shut down? Well, the key to that are the ongoing efforts to get the Muslim Brotherhood declared a terrorist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood is, of course, the forefather of Al-Qaeda and Hamas, both of which were founded by people who had links to the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood is in itself responsible for a great many terror attacks, that is, Brotherhood sympathizers and Brotherhood members in Egypt and elsewhere. Hamas, the jihad terror group in Gaza, calls itself the Muslim Brotherhood for Palestine. And so there is a great deal of reason to declare the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, and then that would lead to CARE as a Muslim Brotherhood organization being also declared a terrorist organization. But there are so many Muslim Brotherhood and Muslim Brotherhood linked operatives in the US government right now and in the various intelligence agencies that this has been a very uphill battle and is going to continue to be a very uphill battle. Number 12, what is the most concerning aspect of having a Sharia-compliant Muslim for an attorney general? And of course, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm sure there's nobody who doesn't know in your group, you're referring to Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota and the former congressman. Now, Ellison, it's very dangerous to have him as Attorney General of Minnesota, because remember that Ilhan Omar's district, which Keith Ellison used to be the congressman from, is the terror capital of the world and the place from which the most terrorists have gone to join jihad terror groups, more that is than any other place in the United States. And what is happening with those people? Are they being prosecuted? Are they even being investigated? Are the mosques in Minnesota being investigated? And that question, of course, goes back to the Attorney General of Minnesota. And so he's in a position to quash investigations that need to be made of these people. I don't know if he has done so, but I'm not in Minnesota. You're actually in a better position than I am to know that. But that's certainly the danger. That is what Minnesota is risking by having this man there, that there will be no investigations or only perfunctory investigations of jihad terror activity in the whole state. as a matter of fact. Number 13. Why do the Afghani Muslims have the bachabazi, yet gay Muslim men are stoned or hung or thrown off rooftops? Here again, for anybody who might not know, the bachabazi is the practice of a great many Afghan men, maybe even a majority, nobody knows, but a great many Afghan men to have young boys who travel with them. This is particularly true of Afghan truckers, and they are known as the bachabazi, the pleasure boys who they have sex with, essentially. And this is something that is extraordinarily widespread in Afghanistan. But the thing that must be understood is that there's an old expression in Afghanistan, women are for children, boys are for pleasure. And as long as you are having sex with women and having babies, and as long as you're therefore married, then that's okay what you do with the boys. This is also true in Iraq and some other places in the Islamic world. As long as you're having children, then you're not a homosexual. And so you can essentially do this, and it's winked at. As if you, however, declare that you are gay or homosexual or whatever, then you're saying that you're not going to have a wife and babies. And that's when the punishments for homosexuality come into play. And those are the people who are put to death. Number 14. Why do some who are opposed to the oppression from Islam practice anti-Semitism and Jew hatred themselves? Well, the reason for that is because, unfortunately, there are more wellsprings of anti-Semitism than just Islam. Islamic anti-Semitism is very deeply rooted in the Quran and the Sunnah, in the teachings of Muhammad as well as in the Islamic Holy Book. But that's not the only source of anti-Semitism. There's been, unfortunately, Christian anti-Semitism from the beginning of Christianity, based on passages of the New Testament that were widely interpreted as implicating all Jews in the death of Christ and in other things. And there was, before Christianity, there was anti-Semitism among the pagan Romans and others. And so there also, you can take in the 20th century, the Nazis, who of course were not Muslims, although they allied with Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, who lived in Berlin from 1941 to 45 and was good friends with Himmler and Eichmann. At the same time, Nazi anti-Semitism is something that comes from bizarre racial theories. It's based on Christian anti-Semitism, but the Nazis were actively anti-Christian as well as anti-Semitic. And they had their own reasons for being anti-Semitic that Hitler outlines at length in Mein Kampf, his apologia, his book defending and explaining what he was all about. And so there are, unfortunately, still anti-Semitic neo-Nazis today, and some even Christian anti-Semites and others who have nothing to do with Islam, or they may be allied with Islam or admire Islam, but they're not Muslims themselves. And so that's why you might find people who are opposed to Islamic oppression being anti-Semitic and engaging in the same kind of anti-Semitic tropes, as Muslim spokesmen do. I would not advise pursuing any alliance with such people. We have to be consistent in our support for human rights across the board. Number 15, how can we stop them from erasing our current history? We should be taught that Hitler worked with the Mufti, there you go, and that he had 2 SS regiments that were Islamic. Books and blogs like yours are an excellent resource, but we've seen several of them removed off different platforms lately. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, that we have to support the president in doing our best to make sure that fairness is restored to these social media platforms. A lot of libertarians and neocon conservatives, they both think that it's terrible to say this, that Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Google and all the rest of them are private companies, and so we shouldn't be calling for government interference in them. But that's, I think, a very short-sighted view. These are monopolies. They control the means of communication to a degree greater than any totalitarian government ever controlled them in the past. And if they are not stopped, then the freedom of speech is going to be an empty fiction in the United States, and that means we will not be a free society. And so we have to confront these monopolies. And in the early part of the 20th century, there were a great many monopolies that were broken up. Some of you may be old enough to remember when AT&T, the phone monopoly, was broken up in the 1970s, I believe it was, maybe 80s. And I think that these things are, if anything is a monopoly, it's these. And they have to be broken up or we are in very serious trouble. Number 16, how can you tell if a mosque is teaching radical views? Very simply, go in it and look at their literature and talk to the people there. You can go in, if you're not known by face to the Muslim groups in your area, go in as an interested observer and ask questions in an innocent manner, as if you've heard things online or heard things about people. But you have to be very aware. And one thing I can recommend are articles by my colleague Hugh Fitzgerald at Jihad Watch, who's written a great deal about open houses at mosques, how to ask, what kind of questions to ask that will pierce through the deceptions that you're being fed, how you can inform yourself in order to be able to spot those deceptions. Also, you could look up the work of David Gabatz. I'm sure that Chris Gabatz is familiar to some of you in your area because I know he's been active in Minnesota. Dave's father, Chris is Dave's father. No, sorry, Dave is Chris's father. And he has done extensive research in mosques all over the country. Many of the reports are available online. You should study those and see. I've published a few of them at Jihad Watch. I'd like to publish more if I can. Those reports are very illuminating, and they're very good guide for you if you want to go into a mosque and start looking around and asking questions. Be very careful when you do so. You obviously don't want to let on to who you are or what you're doing, but he can show you the kinds of things to look for. 17, do you think Minnesota is already overtaken? Remember, Doom Spiro Sparrow, while I believe, I hope. There are a lot of Minnesotans who are not in favor of what's happening. And is it too late to turn it around? I would never say so. A lot of surprises throughout human history, and you could be responsible for some new ones in Minnesota. Are we living in the upper house now? I don't know what that means. Maybe are you referring to the House of Islam as opposed to the House of War, which is a distinction that is very ancient in Islamic theology? In any case, no. Minnesota is still the Dar al-Harb, the House of War that has to be incorporated into the House of Islam, and that's certainly working on doing that, but they haven't finished yet. Number 18, do you think they will ever finish the prosecution of the Holy Land Foundation trial? Is it too late to follow through? Obama shut down this trial. What did this tell you about him? Well, there's no doubt that Obama was not interested in seeing Muslim groups prosecuted. There were investigations of CARE, not just the Holy Land Foundation, but a lot of the groups that were named unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial. CARE included that, well, actually it was CARE's parent group, the Islamic Association for Palestine. But in any case, there was an investigation of CARE and some other Muslim groups going on when Obama became president, and then the Obama FBI shut them down. And yet, at the same time, there were several leaders of the Holy Land Foundation who were convicted of terror funding offenses and were jailed as a result. And so it wasn't as if nothing was done in the Holy Land Foundation trial. And of course, I think the greatest thing that came out of it was the trove of documents from the Holy Land Foundation, and most notably the explanatory memorandum for North America, that is the Muslim Brotherhood's plan for how it was going to take over the United States. This is a plan that they've been following through very scrupulously, and so it's worth studying and calling attention to people about it. But will there be more? There should have been when Trump became president. I can only hope that he will continue to do this. And here again, I believe that the linchpin is the declaration of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terror group. Number 19, do you think we will see another 9/11 style attack? And you might be surprised by this answer, but I would say anything is possible, and I wouldn't be surprised if one happened, but I think it's more likely that there will not be a significant, massive terror attack like that in the foreseeable future. And the reason was enunciated by an imam of a mosque in Georgia not long ago. And if I'm not mistaken, this was one of Dave Gabatz's investigations, but I could be wrong about that. But in any case, if you search for Georgia Mosque at Jihad Watch, you'll get the report. There was an imam in a mosque in Georgia, that is in Jimmy Carter, Georgia, right here in the United States, who said, when he was asked about this, that there was no need for there to be a major jihad terror attack in the United States right now, because he said we're winning without them. And this recalls back in 2007, a report from an FBI agent that I incorporated into my book, Stealth Jihad, which is still available, on sale now. And the FBI agent said that the Hezbollah group had a lot of sleeper cells in the United States, which is interesting because Hezbollah has not been responsible for any significant terror attack in the United States. And the Hezbollah operatives were saying, we don't need to mount a terror attack in the United States at this time because we're winning without it. And that was in 2007. And if anything, they have continued to win, particularly under the Obama administration, and to a lesser degree with Trump in the Oval Office. It's not that he doesn't realize what they're all about and doesn't want to fight them, but he's been so stymied in effective action, particularly the protracted court battles against his temporary ban on immigration from a limited number of Muslim countries that were actually chosen by the Obama administration. So will we see another 9/11 style attack? I think as long as they think they're winning, no. And we can only hope that if they stop thinking that they're winning, they will still be unable to mount such an attack, because part of the way in which they will begin to lose will be a vast improvement in our counterterror efforts. Number 19, do you think we will, oh, sorry. Number 20, do you think Islam, the perfect word of God, can be reformed? Do you see any way this could be accomplished by the people who are proposing it? No, I don't see that. I was just having a discussion, though, with my wife the other day, and she said, well, you can't really say it's impossible. After all, Reform Judaism is a rejection of the literal understanding of a great deal of Jewish teaching, and probably for many centuries, many people assumed that that would be impossible. I don't know that Reform Judaism is a movement that's going to have any really lasting effect. It's lasted for about 100 years now, and maybe it'll last for a few hundred more, but I don't know that it's going to be significant in the life of Judaism, but I'm no expert on that. But I'd say it's even more difficult in Islam because of the verse that you mentioned, chapter 5, verse 3 of the Quran, which says, has Allah saying, this day I have perfected your religion for you. If the religion is perfect, then any innovation in it, even one that's for the good, that makes it kinder and gentler and less murderous, is going to be considered to be bid'ah, which is innovation, which is absolutely forbidden in Islam. And if you are accused of bid'ah, then you're very suspect as being not a true Muslim, and perhaps a heretic or an apostate, and heretics or apostates are to be put to death. So that's the very, very difficult obstacle that any genuine Islamic reform, as opposed to the Islamic reform that is just designed to lull Westerners into a sense of complacency, that Islamic reform is very unlikely. I'll never say impossible, but it's extraordinarily unlikely. So anyway, thank you. I hope that those answers were adequate. If you have any other questions, I'd be glad to take them now. But it's getting to be that my voice is a bit shredded, so I hope that we can wrap this up in the next few minutes. In any case, thank you for having me, and if you do have any questions, I'll be glad to take them at this point.
We just had, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we just had one quick bonus question, and that was, how do we get rid of the stigma or counter effect it? So while we're being called...
Always remain on the offense, never be defensive. Don't keep saying you're not Islamophobic. Ask those who say you're Islamophobic how they can, how come they don't care about the human rights of women who are brutalized or even killed for not wearing hijab? How come they don't care about the women whose lives are destroyed with female genital mutilation or honor killing? How can they say they're defenders of human rights when all these human rights abuses under Islamic law have they don't have any interest in them whatsoever, and try to put them on the defensive and explain that you are the ones that are fighting for human rights, but you actually care about the human rights of Muslims, which they don't care about at all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spencer. We're going to pass out cards if you guys want to support his work. We appreciate it. We'll send you emails with anything else that comes up. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Yay.